I'm going to explain periods from ancient shamanic wisdom of matriarchal Celtic cultures. There are cultures all over the world with this matriarchal wisdom. And I've confirmed this from many women that I hang out with. It's a full moon right now, and my period literally started like 2 hours before the full moon, like before, I think it was like at 5 p.m. today around, and my period started around like 3 p.m. Well, if women just were taught this wisdom, we would not need abortions, really hardly ever. We wouldn't need to be taking hormonal birth control or putting, like, inserting metal in your uterus. Or I tried birth control when I was married a long time ago when I was younger, and it was making me throw up. It was making me sick. And so what I learned is that women's periods either start around the new moon or the full moon. And this is based on their personality. So really quick, if you are not wanting to have children and you are a very creative or kind of like witchy person, you're channeling your creativity in other areas besides creating children, your period will most likely fall on a full moon. So for example, I had a friend who had 5 kids. And her period always started on the new moon, and mine would start on the full moon. So this leads me back into, if you are in mother mode, or spending your energy creating children and nurturing life, then your period will most likely fall on the new moon. The more in sync with nature you are, so that's why it's very important to sit on the ground, earth yourself. The more in tune with nature you are, your body will be in more alignment with either the full moon or the new moon. Before I get further into this video, I just want to clarify that women's periods being synced up to the moon is not an excuse to assign the feminine energy to the moon. Another thing I realized when I was making this video is, why do I keep pointing out menstruation being related to the moon? I should be equally pointing out that ovulation is also related to the sun or the solar time period, but it's also related to the moon as well because of the cycle of a woman. Ovulation is when women are in their solar time or in heat. And ovulation is just as important to pay attention to. Even if you can ignore ovulation and you have to pay attention to menstruation because women are bleeding, ovulation is a time period when all of us are conceived. So that's the time period where we're called into the world. Assigning the matriarchal knowledge to the moon is the reason why this information, which is very valuable, has become non-mainstream and classified as the occult. By assigning men to the sun, in mainstream Christianity, we have this idea that Jesus is God or the Son of God, and that his equal half, Mary Magdalene, is a woman of the night, a prostitute, or lunar feminine. By assigning women to the moon, people are being subliminally programmed to think that women have no light of their own and can only reflect patriarchy. In many Native American stories, they have a grandfather sun and grandmother moon. But you have to keep in mind that many tribes were forced to take on a structure of patriarchy in order to be recognized by the government. Many tribes that were actually matriarchal had to become patriarchal just to be recognized as existing. There are several cultures that view the women as the sun or the light and the man as lunar or the moon. I personally do not believe in assigning gender to the sun, the moon, or even the earth, because when we view the earth as a mother, we can overlook the nurturing properties that men can offer. As I explained in some of my other videos, solar and lunar energy is not masculine, feminine energy. Solar and lunar energies are not for one gender. All this energy is confirmed where, like, even mothers who have decided they don't want to have children, I notice their periods will suddenly start syncing up to the full moon instead of the new moon. So again, new moon period starts on a new moon, you're ovulating on the full moon. That's women who are more mother oriented, who are focusing their energy on nurturing actual children and life and babies. And if your period starts on a full moon, that's like the witch, like they say it's the witchy women, but I don't like to use the word witch. I think it's just, you are like a shamanic healer. You're spending your creative energies in more like third eye art type of forms. Women's periods are a natural indicator of their health. So the more pain and the more like messed up your body is around your period, or some people actually report period-like symptoms in ovulation, that means there's something kind of out of balance. And then the more in sync you are, like, your periods won't hurt as much, or you won't have to like be cramping up if you are more in sync with nature and you are healthier. Like, if I eat junk food and my period will start, I will be like in so much pain. I will be like crying and depressed. But the last few days I've been eating superfoods. My favorite superfood is made by Pure Synergy, and it just includes an all-around balance of a lot of dried plants, Raspberry leaf tea is the best herb you can take for any time of month, whether it's your menstruation, ovulation. And clary sage is an essential oil that can be used for PMS. When my last grandmother died in 2019 on my brother's birthday, and my brother had just had his second newborn baby boy, which would have been her great-grandchild. And I'm glad she got to see 2 of her great-grandchildren before she died, because they were her only great-grandchildren she saw. And she died at 96, and she was like the perfect example of like a perfect grandmother. And nobody's perfect, I know, but she was like a stereotypical perfect grandmother. She refused treatment. She didn't want to stay alive longer. She was on hospice. I was crying at my grandmother's funeral, and my brother handed me his newborn baby boy. And ever since I was a little girl, I've never wanted to have children. I always wanted to be a nun or adopt children. And then once my brother handed me his newborn baby boy, I was like, oh, it made so much sense. I'm like, oh, we got death, now we have life. Like, it was like, oh, and suddenly I was like, I want to have children. And so I meditated on having children. And within 3 months of like being around my brother's children and holding like a baby and holding like a little toddler, because he had a toddler, my period shifted from the full moon to the new moon. So once I moved to a city and I started dating men again, and I was like, I can't create life with these people because they're not conscious. My biggest problem with men is, and even women, women are more conscious about creating life than men are, but men are not conscious at all about participating in the creation of life. And that's why you have all these men saying that women trick them into having children. A lot of women, I don't think, trick men into having children. I think they don't even know when they're ovulating. They're not conscious enough to even know the cycles of the moon. People have been conditioned to view the feminine energy as lunar for so long that they don't realize that even though women's cycles revolve around the moon, within these cycles, they have a lunar time, which is menstruation, and a solar time, which is ovulation. Solar and lunar energies overlap in both men and women. Men are not exclusively the sun or fire, and women are not exclusively water and the moon. Some men are actually more watery, and this doesn't mean they're feminine. And some women are more fiery, and this does not mean that they are masculine women. The biggest manipulation of the one world government mainstream religions is assigning men to the sun and women to the moon. Ovulation is when women are perceived as the most beautiful, they feel the most confident, and they are the most fertile. If women don't even know when they're the most fertile because our culture has wiped out the solar feminine, they can't even control when they create life, much less men knowing about this. So this is not a good idea to wipe out solar feminine knowledge. If you are very conscious about this, you can literally look up at the moon and you use the moon as a form of birth control. You can know if you're ovulating and when you're the most fertile, and then you can also know when you're the least fertile, which is like right before your period. I meditated for like 2 years, but within 3 months of me feeling so strongly that I wanted to have children after holding my brother's newborn baby at my grandmother's funeral, my period shifted from the full moon, which has been on the full moon for like years, as long as I can remember, to the new moon. But then once I tried dating men and trying to find somebody to have children with in a natural way, not from like sperm donors or something like that, and I just gave up. I felt like it's like I can't create life from a place of ignorance and trauma bonding. Shame. I have to create life from a place of love. So in reality, a lot of people hold trauma in their sacral area, regardless of whether they're raped or not, too. So when people have sex with other people, a lot of times they are connecting with them based on trauma, based on shame or fear or some kind of trauma they need to work out. And the spirits being called into that form of sex are going to have to deal with being karmatically challenged, because that's the energy they were called into life from. And so if you read a lot of spiritual books like the Tibetan Book of the Dead, I haven't read the Egyptian Book of the Dead, but the Tibetan Book of the Dead is all about not reincarnating. It's people literally think that we're in a matrix, which I don't believe. I think you can't be in the 5th dimension if you get rid of the 3rd dimension. That would be like, there's this false idea where if you want to be a spirit, you have to lose your body. And that's not what we're here to do. We're here to learn to be in the physical density and maintain the spiritual density at the same time. But a lot of people think, don't reincarnate into a human body because you're just going to have a whole life full of suffering. That only comes into play when your sex energy is being used from a place of trauma instead of creation, empowered creation through love and personal power. Maybe humans are slaves. I'm not sure,
The Anunnaki narrative speaks of us laboring for superiors, and you can see that we're hardwired to do that. But what if we were able to break down that programming and start working for one another instead of those above us? What if we de-engineered all our neurological slave settings and allowed ourselves to live freer, less fearful lives? What would that look like?
Once I gave up, I'm like, I'm never going to find somebody. My period went back on the full moon, and it's been consistently on the full moon. And if I'm not taking care of myself, it'll be like 1 day off or 2 days off or 3 days later. But if I take care of myself and I'm respectful of my body, it will be like almost at the exact time. Today it was like 2 hours right before the peak of the full moon. Like, all this matriarchal wisdom has been wiped out so that women are not in control of their bodies. Like, we need to have birth control. They need to have like children in a hospital. The whole process of birthing gets taken over by this authoritarian AMA medical institution. It's kind of frustrating that a lot of the people that were promoting the freedom from the AMA in the COVID shutdown are the same people that are trying to control female sexuality, and people need to be consistent with their ideals. If you have women that miscarry, there shouldn't be laws that investigate them so they can charge women with felonies. This is a karmatic consequence where the AMA's abuse of power is related to the abuse of the medical industry over the female body in pregnancy and childbirth or miscarriage. So it's just important to be conscious about all these energies that feed each other. I knew a woman who had like 7 kids. She had a girl, and the hospital charged her $3,000 for a circumcision. And it was a girl, so they were adding all these crazy fees for things that women didn't even need. The AMA is like just takes over your health and doesn't allow you to consent to a lot of the stuff that they're doing. This idea where you're supposed to be a virgin and a mother at the same time, women are afraid to actually give birth because they're afraid their hymen is going to tear, and then they won't be the same. If you understand matriarchal shamanic knowledge, you know that doing flexibility exercises, your hymen is not supposed to tear when you have sex, ever, much less. Like, it's not supposed to tear when you give birth, much less when you have sex for the first time.
We are medical students, sexual health workers, and in our experience, people seem to believe that the hymen is some kind of a seal covering the vaginal opening. In Norwegian, it is even called the virgin membrane.
That's one of the most perverted patriarchal concepts that's in like the Islamic religion. It's in a lot of the Christian and Catholic religions. I don't know if it's in the Jewish religions. It's in the 3 Abrahamic religions where they only worship a father god, and they have lost the wisdom of the mother god.
Now, it is very hard to hide that something has happened to this hoop, right? It is different before and after I punched it. The seal is broken. So if we wanted to do a virginity check on this hoop right here, right now, that would be very easy. It's easy to say that this hoop is not a virgin anymore.
It's a very sick, perverted idea that women can be branded like cows.
The hymen is nothing like a piece of plastic you can wrap around your food or a seal.
Patriarchal religions love to teach the idea that a torn hymen is an indicator of virginity, when really it's just an indicator of being branded like a cow.
It's time we put an end to the virginity fraud. It's time we break the myths about the hymen. It's more like this: a scrunchie or a rubber band. The hymen is a rim of tissue at the outer opening of the vagina. And usually it has a donut or a half-moon shape with a large central hole. But this varies a lot.
People are completely unconscious of the patriarchal religious ideology being tied to human trafficking and modern-day sex trafficking. Although every individual is different.
Since hymens come in every shape and form, it is difficult to know if a dent or a fold in it is there because of previous damage, or if it's just a normal anatomical variant.
The majority of women's hymens don't tear in regular sex, and many women do not even tear when giving birth because estrogen allows women to have flexibility.
In other words, hymens naturally vary a lot in looks.
The hymen is like a scrunchie, in function as well as in looks. And you can stretch a scrunchie, right? You can stretch a hymen too. In fact, it's very elastic. And for a lot of women, the hymen will be elastic enough to handle a vaginal intercourse without sustaining any damage.
I used to work in the Midwest, and I thought I was working with open-minded people, and these women thought that doing yoga was like worshiping the devil, because yoga teaches you to be in control of your body. There's this idea that you being in control of your own body is like satanic worship. That's like the opposite of satanic worship. Satanic worship is being mind controlled and not being in control of your own body. If you own anything in this world, in the time that you're alive, it's your own body. It's literally like, if you say you could own anything, it would be your own body is what you own. And a lot of religions that enslave people don't want people to have knowledge about their own bodies. In cultures where women have a lot of rights, being strong and flexible is seen as a positive thing rather than a demeaning or shameful thing. And I'm not going to confuse this with militant soldiers that are females, because the feminine strength is not just in muscle building, it's actually in flexibility. Estrogen, which is associated with the female hormone, helps the body be more flexible. Women have less testosterone and do not build as much muscle, but they excel in flexibility and sometimes endurance.
This is a mosaic, a floor mosaic actually, in the Piazza Armerina in Sicily, so we can see them using their little hand weights. It was encouraged for Roman women and for Spartan women to exercise, because if you exercised and you were in good physical shape, you could produce better children and care for your children and so forth. So education and physical strength was something the Romans encouraged. They also encouraged childbirth, and women saw really probably more freedom of movement than we had seen in antiquity with Augustus, the first Roman Emperor Augustus.
If you are a flexible woman, you are not going to bleed the first time you have sex. If you are doing the splits, you're doing yoga, you ride horses, you're strong and healthy, you're not going to even bleed or tear when you give birth to a baby, because you are flexible. Your hymen is not supposed to tear ever. Your hymen is supposed to stretch and then return back to the normal size. But if you're not healthy and you don't know anything about your body, like if a woman doesn't bleed when she has sex because she's very flexible and in control of her body and strong, that you are like not a virgin and unworthy of love, unworthy of being married. Basically, all that is what they're really saying is that you're unworthy of being owned as property if you don't bleed the first time you have sex, because you are in more control of your body.
First of all, if you have an elastic hymen, you will simply never bleed from sex. It doesn't matter if you're a virgin or not. It's an anatomical impossibility.
The more knowledge women have about the solar feminine, the less likely they are to be branded like a cow.
Some virgins bleed, but some simply don't.
And it has nothing to do with whether you're a virgin or not, because those stupid virginity tests where they think they can look at you and see if you've ever had sex based on a torn hymen or not, that is not an indicator of being a virgin. That is an indicator of being brutally raped or having a less than desirable pregnancy, like an unhealthy pregnancy, where the birth process was very hard and you tore.
It naturally follows that you can't examine the hymen to check for virginity status. This was noted over 100 years ago, in 1906, by the Norwegian doctor Marie Chalsette. She examined a middle-aged sex worker and concluded that her genitalia were reminiscent of a teenage virgin. That makes sense, right? Because if her hymen was never damaged during sex, then what were we expecting to see?
Cultures that teach shame and fear regarding the female body often create their own reality. So they will have manifestations of unhealthy pregnancies that result in torn hymens. The women are so out of touch with their own bodies that they cannot even give birth without being hospitalized. Cultures that do not grow up with this biblical idea of Eve being punished in childbirth often have women giving birth effortlessly and in ease.
The absurdity of virgin testing is illustrated in a study done on 36 pregnant teenagers. When doctors examined their hymens, they could only find clear signs of penetration in 2 out of the 36 girls. So unless you believe in 34 cases of virgin births,
some of the stupidity that's still being reiterated. We think we live in a scientific culture, but the reality is a lot of colleges and universities everywhere around the world were sponsored by the Jesuits and by Catholic priests or Christian priests. If you studied science that didn't align with the church, they wiped certain sciences out and then held favor over other sciences. What people call science today is a lot of times the same thing as religion. It's indoctrination transferred over to a belief system. Less and less people are believing in religion, but they believe in other stuff. So what these shadow people do that want to control and manipulate people, all they do is they find out what people believe in, and then they pay to have their beliefs woven into a system. People again are like can be just as indoctrinated into science as any religious fanatic without knowing it, because they never question and challenged the world around them. I just thought I'd share some ancient shamanic wisdom about new moons and full moons and periods. Well, I'm on my period. The Celtic Wiccan Trinity and the moon cycle and the 4 seasons. When women have their periods every single month, women go through all stages of a cycle of life, death, or the maiden, the mother, and the crone. And if you said that in respect to the masculine sign of the cross, it would be in the name of the crone, the maiden, and the mother. The mother is the heart. So the Holy Spirit is the mother in the female sign of the cross. The crone is the crown. That's the female version of the crown, the head. And the maiden is like the sun. And they confuse virgin with... Virgin is not supposed to be like somebody who's never had sex. Virgin is supposed to be somebody who's free of all influences. Right after your period, when your uterus has cleaned itself out and rid itself of energies, you're in the maiden or the virgin mode. Like that's when people's vaginas or women's vaginas are even like slightly smaller. And then when they're ovulating, that's when in their mother mode, they want to nurture life. They're more loving and giving usually. Some people add another phase from ovulation to menstruation, which is the high priestess, where women are more intuitive. When they're right before their period or on their period, you're in your crone, you're in your hag mode, basically, regardless of your age. You are in your like death time, where you are just slightly out of tune or a little bit disoriented. You use that time period to meditate and purify yourself or heal. So then again, you get back in from the hag or the crone phase, you go back into the maiden or the virgin phase. And so this has been completely corrupted in Christianity or mainstream religions, where they have replaced the mother god with the virgin mother, which is first off unnatural. Nobody is supposed to be a virgin and a mother at the same time. The whole purpose of creating life is the creator is not a virgin. You have to work together with the opposite sex or with dual forces and integrate that when you call in a spirit to create new life. So this idea of like creating life without a father or creating life without a mother is actually very corrupt and very like spiritually perverted concept. Many men have been threatened over a woman's power to call in a spirit, nurture, and create life. So they have created a concept called the homunculus. The homunculus is an idea that you can alchemize a fetus or a human or some kind of subhuman being where men can create life all on their own without a human mother. People think that in vitro fertilization or test tube babies, this is like all new and modern, but in medieval times, people actually thought they could do this. The female version of doing this would be the idea of being a virgin mother, where the female body does not need any kind of male influence or a man to create life with. People have this idea where they should still be virgins and mothers. And I think the Spanish word for pregnant is embarazada or something. Like it's like you're embarrassed, like you had sex and you're pregnant. You should be ashamed and embarrassed. People should be conscious about calling in life from a place of love. So you shouldn't be calling in life because you're being forced to, or your religion teaches you not to understand your own body and the cycles of nature and how your body syncs up to the moon. People should be concerned with unconsciously creating life, which is actually where a lot of people who are part of these religions that have wiped out matriarchy, it's like women aren't even conscious about creating life. And men are even less conscious about creating life. And then as a result, people have like excessive amounts of children that they don't call in from a place of love. They call them in from a place of shame. and fear of going to hell. I'll get into abortion in another topic of the ancient shamanic abortions, because what people don't realize is usually if you're not supposed to call in life, nature creates a natural abortion. So 1/4 or more of all pregnancies end in a natural spontaneous abortion, which is referred to as a miscarriage. And so nature will not support life if the world around you is not supporting it. Nature will automatically do this within 3 months, but I'll get into that further in another video, and why it's 3 months, because that's around the time period where the heartbeat is created. People mistakenly think like cells are human life. Really, you're not a human if you don't have a heart. So the heartbeat is actually what, I think that's when the spirit truly bonds with the matter that's in the womb. So the spirit is not fully called into the fetus until there's a heartbeat. You can avoid all of this if you just know when your body syncs up to the moon, and people were more aligned, like they sit on the dirt, they sit on the ground, they touch the ground, they are in sync with the electromagnetic frequency of the earth, and they are also aware of the moon, and they look at the moon. But in a culture where the foods people eat are so misaligned with the natural world and the way our bodies are supposed to work, and it's creating serious health problems. Women's periods might not be in sync with the moon, and then this method won't work at all.
For women who ovulate on the new moon and menstruate on the full moon, these women are most likely to use their sexual and creative energy in an artistic and healing way. And my personal observation is that usually these women do not have a lot of children. They might just have one child.
So again, like artists, they have tons of sex energy. So they're going to have tons of sex appeal. That's where they're channeling their creative energy. So we're not supposed to we're not made to use all our creative energy to create life, because the survival rate of children has increased over the time. And so most children don't die, versus in the past, the majority of them died before they were age 5. A lot of them died before age 1, and that doesn't happen anymore. So that means we have the freedom, we have an excessive amount of sex energy, and it doesn't mean you deny it or you're ashamed of it. It means you channel it through art, or you use it to channel it in other forms of creation other than creating human life. So I just thought I'd cover the shamanic wisdom of your periods, and if you don't have your period aligned to the moon, you might either be through a transitional phase, you might be transitioning through wanting to have kids to no longer wanting to have children, or the opposite, where you never want to have children and suddenly you feel like you're ready to be a mother. In order to have your period syncing up to the moon, you need to eat plants, a lot of food with a life force in it.
This can also include meat, but I prefer plants. Basically, there are other types of technology that help us measure the nutrition in foods besides the amount of measurable vitamins in foods. The life force in a food, while the food might not have a measurable amount of vitamins and nutrition, for example, like sprouts, the life force in the food will help your own body create its own vitamins. So there are other forms of technology that helps measure the amount of nutrition in the food besides the amount of vitamins.
Sit on the ground, take walks in nature, put your bare feet on the ground. Just be as healthy as possible, and your period will align to either the new moon or the full moon. And obviously hormones are going to affect that. This doesn't apply to people who have are on a shot or a patch where they only have their period once a year, or once every 4 months, or something like that. So, or birth control. Take control of your body and take control of your health.